Well, the theme for this year for the congregation is a people zealous for good works. And of course, as you can see, this is taken from the book of Titus, chapter 2, where Paul describes how the grace of God teaches us that we have responsibilities, and among those responsibilities are to be busy with good works. And that's something where I'm sure that you have noticed, and that has been emphasized, is that in the book of Titus especially, Paul again and again and again stresses that Christians must maintain good works. I think it's aptly summed up in the 3rd chapter when he says, I want you to affirm this and affirm it constantly. I want you to repeatedly, in other words, Titus, remind the Christians they have to be busy about good works. But the good news is that God doesn't leave us to decide what good works are. He doesn't leave us to try and go looking for. He has provided for that in His Word. And so what we're going to consider this morning, good works in the home. And if you want to take the word family and apply it in place of home, that's fine, because that's what we're talking about. So I want to look at good works in the home as far as God describes in His Word. Now, there are a couple of points that I want to make before we actually launch into our lesson. A couple of prefatory comments. And one is this. I understand that not all of us have been blessed to be able to be in good homes. It may be that you are sitting there, and young or old, you realize that your home life, growing up, and even in your adult life, has not been what it could be. And that, in fact, it may have been unpleasant for you in certain regards. There's no desire for my part to pile on any kind of regret or any kind of longing or any kind of melancholy feelings about that. Also, especially for those of you who might be more advanced in years, it may be that you look on your life in the past and the time when you had children around you, and you realize that for whatever reason, maybe it's because you didn't know God yet, or because of bad choices that have been made, the home life was not what it could have been. Again, there's no desire on my part to make anyone feel bad for those things. Those things should not happen, but this is a real world. There are bad homes. And so what I want to encourage is to speak to those who are still in the time of life where they can have a great impact on their family, especially those who are younger, those who have families. But with that said, I certainly am not leaving out those who, again, are more mature in years, because you have grandparents, you still have adult children, and I understand you never stop being a father, you never stop being a mother. You're always the grandparent, in other words, and you still have an important and integral role to play in the formation of the homes in which you are a part of. In other words, we never stop being a part of a home. Now, the second thing I want to make, comment I want to make by way of introduction, and this is especially applying to those who are young, those of you who are getting to the point where you're going to be forming your own homes, forming your own families when you are leaving father and mother. Now, this is for anyone of any age who is not married yet, even down to the youngest, even someone as young as Devin here. You're not going to be concerned right now about finding the special person. You don't need to be worried about that right now. But you do need to be concerned about this. You already need to be forming the resolution that you will not consider marrying someone with whom you cannot possibly make a good home, according to God's will. There are certain things that God expects of a man and of a woman, of a husband and wife, father and mother, and of children. And it is an act of utmost disrespect for God and a lack of concern for His will to go marching into a relationship when you know this individual will not be concerned about having a godly home. You need to form that resolution in your mind right now and make up your mind that you're going to be the type of person who is so lost in God and committed to His ways that if someone is ever going to be attracted to you, they also have to be looking for God and dedicated to His ways. And that's the kind of person that you need to be seeking out. So, with that in mind, we'll go into good works in the home. The first point I want to make to you, and I want to make strongly, is that the home should be a stronghold of godliness in our society. And it is the case that when things in society go wrong, it is because of a breakdown in the home and because of Satan's supposed victories in society. You know, so often you turn on the news and you're watching or you're reading about different things going on in the world. And I want to especially focus in on this country. We hear about the drug wars. You hear about generational gaps in communication and problems there. And it's so sad when you see all the uproar and the chaos and the animosity in the relationship between, for example, police and minorities. Now, my business up here is not to make political or societal comments as my opinion or how I view them, but to apply God's word to these instances. Or acts of gun violence. This is not a political statement, but the first thing that we should be considering in all of these is not what policies should we as a government impose upon our citizenry to help control these things, or what is wrong with police departments, or what is wrong going on in these neighborhoods where all violence is going on. The first thing that should be considered is, what are we doing in our households, in our families? You know, there's a political catchphrase nowadays that was made popular a few decades ago. It's the economy, stupid. Well, in this instance, talk about gun violence or violence on the streets or the breakdown of the education system and all these other things at its root cause. It's the home, stupid, if you want to borrow that phrase. It is the home and this dynamic that's going on in homes and the breaking down of it that's leading to all the problems in society. And one point I want to leave with you this morning and want you to take away is that God's solutions in these instances are always the best. We can listen to psychologists. We can listen to preachers. We can listen and read all sorts of self-help books, but when it comes down to it, what God has said in His Word, these are the correct solutions. And we have to understand that our own personal experiences are so limited. And I understand that standing up here this morning, I still have a lot of life, hopefully ahead of me. There's not much behind me. And my experiences are so limited in the regard of thinking about good homes. But this book is the guide, and it's the source. And I believe it, and I'm committed to that. And that's the attitude that we must have if we're going to have homes that are conducive to good works. So the question I want you to be thinking, as you're part of a home, you're part of a family, how can my family make the most of our stewardship from God? And of course, we won't turn there, but you know in that passage in Matthew 25, Jesus tells a parable about a rich man, this ruler who had 3 servants, and according to each of their abilities, he gave them a certain amount of money. And he expected on his return to receive his investment back with interest. And the point of this parable is that it does no good to take God's blessings, however great or small we might deem them, and then give Him nothing in return, to have nothing to show for it. Different families have different circumstances, whether it's economic or whether it's religious background. Whatever the case is, you have a unique set of challenges and of advantages as a family. And your job is to go through this lesson and to think, how can my family, or even if your family is not concerned about such a thing, how can I personally make the most of my family relationship and achieve good works as far as God deems them? So the 3 parts in this lesson. First, considering a firm foundation for a family producing good works and being what God wants them to be. Secondly, we're going to look at the fact that there's work for all to do, young and old, in the family and in the home. And then finally, we'll consider looking outward for a family's role in being busy with good works and zealous for such. So, the first thing, a firm foundation for the family. It all comes back to this principle. It is difficult, nigh impossible, to produce good works in a home if the home is constantly putting out fires. And what I mean by that is if there's always an argument, there's always drama, there's always something going wrong, it's hard for the family to be focused on how can we be serving God if we're always worried about fussing, fighting, all these problems that we encounter. Now, I don't think anyone in here is naive enough to suppose that family life is going to be perfectly easy and smooth sailing every single day. There will be the days when the sun is shining and the birds are chirping and the rabbits are hopping around the meadows and everything is blissful and going well and smooth. But there are also the dark days, the stormy days, the difficult ones. And it's not the case that it's always going to be easy. There will be fires. That's inevitable. Whenever you're dealing with people, there will be problems. And every one of us can attest to that. But it is the case that when the attitudes are programmed the right way, and they are programmed according to God's word, these are far less, and the family is more productive. So here's an example. Let's turn in our Bibles, and I encourage you to open up your own Bible. I won't have the text on the screen, but let's turn to Ephesians chapter 5. I believe that Paul here, with the inspiration of God, provides such a beautiful and clear statement of the attitudes needed in producing good works in the home. And this principle is submission to one another. And we'll revisit this towards the end of our lesson. I want to take this well-known passage, and I think it's well-known to most people in here, and I want you to read it this morning with the view of, in our home, in my family, how can I fit my role? So consider in chapter 5 of Ephesians, verse 21, that we are to be submitting to one another in the fear of God. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. I want you to picture something here. Envision a home or a family where these verses are obeyed diligently and with a positive attitude every day. Can you imagine what a home that would be? And I understand that none of us in our homes will ever reach that ideal. But can you not see how much better things will go if everyone does their part to make this happen? If a wife wakes up every morning and she says, my job is to make my husband the best man he can be, and I will submit to him as far as God has ordered me and commanded me to. And if the husband in turn wakes up and he thinks, how can I help my wife be the best woman she can be today? What can I do to give her the things that she needs? What can I do this day to help her get closer to heaven than she was when she woke up? Now, the wives think, submit? I don't know about that. Let me tell you, if your husband has made it his goal in life to love you better than himself, it's going to be easier. And husbands, if you go about your day not as much concerned about yourself but your wife, you're going to find it that it's a lot easier and a happier task for her to defer to you as God has so commanded. And children, a lot of times children think, my parents, they don't let me do the things that I want to do. They don't let me do the things that I know I could do. I want more responsibility. I want more freedoms. I want to be able to do more things. One thing that I have observed, not only in my own life, but in a lot of families, where God is the center of it, the more and more that you push and you kick and you resist, the tighter and tighter it gets. You know, I think of the choke collars that we often walk our dogs on. They're walking along by our side, fine, no problem. But if they try to go out ahead or they try and dart out to the side, it chokes them. And the more and more they push and try and go, they're choking, they can't breathe. It's not pleasant for anyone. Yes, I just compared children to dogs. How's that? But it is true that the more and more you push against the restraints, the more parents realize, okay, they're not mature yet. It's still a time for discipline. They still need to be guided. But the more and more you acknowledge the authority of your parents and you understand that all that they are doing is for my good and for my spiritual betterment. Now, they may be wrong in this instance. Parents are humans as well. But the goal and their desire is for my well-being. And as long as I realize that, I can work with that. You know, children don't have to agree with their parents, but they do have to honor them and accept it. And it amazes me how the more often you do that, and when the older you get, the more mature you get, hopefully, you realize, I'm so glad. If you have these attitudes in the home, this is the ground out of which good works come. And we won't revisit this passage because it was ably read in the scripture reading before, but Colossians describes deferring to one another, forgiving one another, loving one another. These attitudes are the ground from which the good works in the family spring, the fertile ground for that. And so my question to you is, are you contributing or are you detracting from the attitudes in the home? You control yourself. You affect others, but you can only control yourself. And you need to make it your goal. My behavior and my attitude towards my family members is not dependent on how they treat me. I will treat them the way that God has instructed me. And it may be that they don't treat you the right way. You may think you're not getting your fair share in whatever is going on in the home. That's between them and God. And it's your job not to be part of the problem in the family, but to be part of God's solution. So let's consider some practical things, some specifics. What are the good works now that we can be doing in the home? There's work for all, both young and old, husband, wife, children, grandparents. I want to start by going back to our main text for the theme of this year. Go to Titus chapter 2. Now, we may not exactly think of Titus chapter 2 and verses 1 through 8 as home life, but it involves things that have to do with the home. So I want to read these verses. Titus 2, 1 through 8. I want to read the first verse and make a quick comment. But as for you, speak the things which are proper for sound doctrine. Now, a lot of times we have the idea, sound doctrine, what does that include? Well, it includes teaching what is true about salvation. It's not getting into error as far as the work of the church. Or it's getting marriage and divorce right. Well, those things are important. They're a part of sound doctrine. But as we're about to find, there's a lot more that is included and under the category of sound doctrine. And by sound here, that which is healthy, that which produces soundness or wholesomeness in the life of the Christian. So here's what it involves. Notice that there are 4 age groups here. Well, rather 4 groups. 2 age groups, old and young, and then both sexes, men and women. Verse 2. So the older men, teach them that they be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith, in love, in patience. The older women likewise, that they be reverent in behavior, not slanderers, not given to wine, teachers of good things, that they admonish the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, homemakers, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be blasphemed. Likewise, exhort the young men to be sober-minded, in all things, showing yourself to be a pattern of good works. In doctrine, showing integrity, reverence, incorruptibility, sound speech that cannot be condemned, though one who is an opponent may be ashamed, having nothing evil to say of you. Now then, a few comments on this passage. I'll let each one of you decide which category you fit into, whether you're the older man or the younger man, older woman or the younger woman. Whatever the case is, and whatever category you place yourself in, there's work for you to do. There are attitudes, there are actions that are demanded because of the place that you are in life. And for the men, there will be people who say, God's commands here are restrictive. Whether it's for an older man or the younger man, you have things that you want in life, you have your goals, you have your ambitions. Don't be restricted. Don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't do. You be the boss of your own life. And women are often told the idea of being obedient to your husband, of having to be told like a child, love your husband, of being told here that part of being a godly young woman is being a homemaker, being discreet and chaste. There are those who say those things are restrictive, they're suffocating, and they're part of what's wrong in society. We have a decision to make. Are we going to determine what is good and wrong? Are we going to establish our morals by our standard, by society's standard, or by God's standard? That's where the question really lay. And that is where our loyalties are shown and how we approach this topic. The godly answer is, God's ways are for my own good, and I need to seek out those things as well. Another way of putting this in the home, givers and takers, which one are you? And by giver, this is the person who is always concerned, or at least predominantly concerned with, what does this individual need? How can I be of a help to my family member? What needs to be done right now, and how can I do it? The taker, on the other hand, is more self-absorbed. Why isn't this person fulfilling my need right now? Why aren't they doing this for me? Or how dare I be told to serve in this capacity? And this can go from the most important of things down to the smallest and most mundane that goes on in the home. For example, a meal is prepared. Someone prepared it. Someone thought about getting everything together. Someone planned it. Someone was in the kitchen or wherever and prepared it, and someone serves it. They all eat. Everyone enjoys. Are you the type of person who comes in and asks, while it's being prepared, what can I do to help? And actually sticking around to hear an answer and to do it? Are you the type who, after the meal is done and eaten, that you hop up and you run away to do whatever it is that you want to do? Or are you the type to stay behind, even if no one else does, to clean up? Now, there are much more important things going on in a family than meals, but I'm using this as an example. Even the smallest things reveal the basic attitudes that we all possess. Are you self-absorbed, or are you concerned about being a servant to others? And maybe it's not a bad example to use, because it's in the smallest points, the smallest things in life, where our true character is revealed. And so I encourage you, whether it's keeping up around the home, whether it's being a shoulder to lean on, an ear for someone to vent after an awful day, whether it's a kind note or a text or a message, think, how can I give to my family rather than simply taking? And on a final note here, also learn how to be a good taker. Learn to accept it without making the person feel bad or making the person feel like, well, you don't really want their help. Learn to be a gracious receiver. Remember that the Lord said it is more blessed to give than to receive, but also learn at being a gracious receiver, to thank them, to appreciate, and to show gratitude when it's needed. There are a few other things I want to do by way of these practical things as far as good works in the home. And that's the Sermon on the Mount, using as a guide. I want to show you just a few examples on this next slide on how that a family can use the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapters 5 through 7 as a good guide and a standard for what you can be doing to achieve good works within the home. Number 1, loyalty and not lust. As Jesus describes in Matthew chapter 5 and verses 27 through 30, that if you even look upon a member of the opposite sex to lust after them, you've committed adultery in your heart. This is something where you might be sitting there thinking, well, this is a bare minimum. Of course I do that. That's not necessarily a given, even within the church in this day and time. It is sad to think of the many homes that have not only been destroyed by outright, overt adultery, but have been destroyed by things like pornography or other forms of ungodly entertainment. Now then, this is a good thing for the home to think about. Husbands, you have a great responsibility here. And children, young men, you have a great responsibility here to realize that if I make poor choices in this arena, I am creating great unhappiness in my home. I am destroying a lot of influence that I could have to make a good influence in the home and to do good works. And I am tearing down my wife or my husband for the women, or I am destroying my parents. These things must be considered. And it is not to be dismissed that it is a good work to go about your day with the mindset, I want to completely avoid and destroy any influence that might cause me to lust and thus be unfaithful to God spiritually and destroy my family. This is a work for everyone in the home to think about. And this is, again, a very practical point. The picture or the video that I am about to repost or to like, does it encourage lust or does it encourage godly morals? The television program that I'm watching with my children, is it wholesome? Is it something that is impressing upon them that indulging in lust and stirring those feelings up is fine and okay, and in fact manly or feminine? Or on the other hand, does it stay away from those things? The commercials that we allow to be on our television, are we allowing portals of sin and of lust and of sex to be allowed into our very living room? Or are we concerned about commercials and aware of what's going on and seek to eliminate those? Now, someone might come along and I can hear them saying, now look, you got to understand that you're in a real world here. And it's not like your children aren't being exposed to these things. It's not as if they don't see these things. And so you might as well not hide these things from them, because they might get out into the world and they're going to go crazy when they realize that these things are there and you've been sheltering them the entire life. And there are a few things right about that. And one is, yes, your children will be exposed to those, like it or not, because the world constantly seeks to teach and to impose morals on our children. And there is a value now placed in society, and especially in places of higher learning and in schools, there is a value and a premium on desensitizing children to things like the human body and to sex. And this is now a goal in much of society. This is the viewpoint that these Judeo-Christian morals and these attitudes that are labeled as puritanical or prudish are part of what's wrong with our open-minded society. And these things stymie progress and creative thought. The only thing that they stymie and the only things that these attitudes war against are the wiles and the temptations of the devil. And so what we as parents need to realize, they are being exposed to that, but the home is the stronghold of godliness in the world. And no matter what happens out there, no matter what storms are raging, it will be godly in this home. And we have the ability and the wherewithal to make that decision. And that will impress upon children your mindset and your thoughts, and your moral code will not be shaped by other people. Let it be shaped by God and His Word. And that is a valuable lesson for parents to instill, not just in this specific category, but in everything in life. Another good work from the Sermon on the Mount, marriage is forever. And again, well, I'm a Christian, I'm sitting here. Look at me and look at my husband or wife. I've put up with them now for so many years. This, again, is not something we should take for granted anymore. Marriage is forever. And a good work in the home is anything that a husband or wife does to contribute to that being possible. It takes two people to commit to creating this happy, godly marriage. Now, it may be the case that one, because of their godly attitude and their commitment, despite the poor decisions of their spouse, can keep it together, but it's not what God really had in mind. It's not the magical, and I use that term loosely, the magical kind of relationship that God had in mind. Not only where two people love one another and care for one another and are there for one another, but where there's happiness in doing so. You know, I've heard sometimes, and I've overheard conversations among those who have been married for some decades, and they'll say something along the lines of, I love my husband, but I don't like him. Or, I love my wife, but boy, I cannot wait to get out of the house every now and then, away from her. I understand that you need time to yourself. I get that. But why should a marriage limp along being like that? When, according to my decision and their decision, we can make it something that God would be more happy with, and that we can live a content life. Whatever you do, whether it's an act of service for them, whether it's doing an errand for them, whether it's telling them something that you are impressed with and proud of and respect in them, and also being loyal to them and withholding any kind of affection that would somehow cast aspersions upon your relationship, these things are good works for husbands and wives to do to keep this marriage forever and to keep it lasting happily forever. Another thing that's so important in the home, and I just have a few more and we're going to get to our conclusion, is that honesty, not deceit, should be the rule in the family. And that's important especially for children, I understand. Children come to a point in their life when they realize, there is such a thing as portraying events, not as they happened, and in such a way that's to my benefit. I'm not sure what age that always happens or where children always learn this, but there comes that time when they understand the concept of deceit and that there are advantages. There may not be good ones, they may not be godly or correct, but there are seemingly advantages to lying. That's something that the parents also must take with the greatest seriousness. Children make poor decisions. Husbands and wives make poor decisions sometimes. And that's weakness of character. It's not to be excused, but it happens. But to deceive, to lie, whether it's out of pride or whether it's out of desire to look better than you really are, or not look as bad as you really are, what that reveals then is not just a moment of weakness or something to tweak or to fix, but it reveals an attitude that is absolutely rotten to the core, where you have such disdain for other people and their viewpoints and their feelings and such disdain for God, and you are so self-absorbed that I want the world to at least look the way I want it to. That's an ungodly attitude that leads to so many problems. A home cannot be happy or produce good works if there is deceit ruling the day. Also, going the extra mile. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but always ask yourself in the home, it's not a question of what do I have to do to get by? What do I have to do right now in my relationship with parents or children or spouse? What can I do extra to make them happy? What can I do to go the extra mile with them? To do one more extra task, to stay a little bit longer working on something, to send one extra word of affirmation or of comfort. Love without conditions. I'm going to skip through some of these because time is constricting on us this morning. I do want to linger for a moment on this one. Jesus here gives instructions on praying. And one thing that I want to encourage a good work in the family is to pray together. And I encourage you that if you don't pray together as a family, that you begin that today. It may be that you've got children in the home. That's a wonderful opportunity. Don't just pray at nighttime. Don't just pray at meals. There should be opportunities where you simply say, all right, everyone, if at all possible, unless there's something that's an emergency or that must be done, we're going to get together and we're going to pray for just a little bit. It doesn't have to be an occasion, just to give thanksgiving, just to stop and to praise God. Or maybe there have been arguments, there have been hard feelings. Don't just separate until the feeling dissipates. Don't just get together, have your powwow, and say, okay, we've talked it out. We're going to try and go ahead. Pray after that. Let me tell you something. It is really hard after the amen of a prayer like that than to look at your family members and to be angry with them still. There's something about coming together in together in weakness to God and asking for His help for attitudes and problems that makes dealing with those problems a lot easier. Pray together. Husbands and wives without the children. Maybe the children are gone, whatever. Do you pray together? You need to do that. You have special temptations that only your spouse can help you with. You have insecurities, you have other things that your spouse need to know about so they can help you, and you can pray together. I mean, by all means, you intend to be an eternity together in heaven. You might as well be spending a lot of time praying to God and getting a foretaste of that. Pray together and give thanks for one another. The last one I want to spend some time on. Matthew 7:12, it's been termed the golden rule. But Jesus said, whatever you want men to do to you, you do also to them. And then He says, for this is the law and the prophets. And I simply want to say on this matter here, that if you want a truly happy home, the one that's working according to how God has ordained, if everyone is thinking, I want to do for my family members the way I want to be treated by them, life is what God envisioned for the home. Is that the source of your decision making, or is it selfishness? So, I've gotten excited, and I've talked a long time about my first 2 points. And as you're noticing, that doesn't leave me a lot of time for the third. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to express my thoughts as clearly as I can, and I'm going to leave it with you, and maybe we can talk about it later or get to it some other time. But looking outward, so much of what I've said so far concerns good works within the home, within the walls, within the car of the family. But what about looking outward? The family needs to ask itself, how can we serve others? How can our family serve other people? Maybe it's with hosting Bible studies or potlucks, as some even do here. How can our family do that? How can our family show hospitality? That's not just a job for the wives anymore. Are we understanding that's a job for the men, for the whole household to be a hospitable household? How can our family serve others? Secondly, how can our family serve the church? There are things that as individuals we must be aware of, that we have responsibilities to the church. But families are unique as well. Each family, as I said before, has its own set of advantages, its own set of disadvantages. Things a family as a personality does well, they don't do so well. Think about it. Those who are able to make decisions within the family, maybe it's parents. Maybe it's children who are now Christians and who are older and are maturing. They need to be brought at least into the thought process, how can our family serve this congregation? And finally, is our family a blessing or a curse on society? It's sad when you see the family and when they go and they part and they go their separate ways in the morning, you think demons are being unleashed upon the world now. And we need to be aware of the fact that we don't need to be the problem there. We all have bad days, but we need not be that problem. Or, as a family, are we being a blessing on society as we go out and we go our separate ways? So my last thought this morning in our conclusion on thinking about good works in the home, it is the case that the home, designed by God, is either a small taste of heaven on earth or is a small taste of hell upon earth. And I use that with the utmost seriousness. It can be a foretaste of that which is divine, or it can be a world of turmoil, of hurt feelings, of insecurity, of pain and problems, that people are eager to get away from. And, the homes are not things that when they're broken, you take them like you might take your car to the mechanic. They're not things that are broken like that you can just get in there and fix. Homes are made of people. And when things are not going well and there are problems, it means that there are people problems. That someone is making a poor decision, someone has a bad attitude. And the degree to which everyone in the home can unify and can be ruled and guided by God's word. Not only is there peace in a good home, but the home is useful to society, to the church, and to the world, which is what God planned the home to be. You've listened very patiently this morning, and I thank you for that. And I pray that by God's grace and His help that you can make this so. If you would go ahead and take out your songbook, turn to the song that has been selected for the Song of Encouragement. It's an encouragement to someone who's not a Christian to be one today. If you believe in the Son of God and you're ready to commit your life to Him in everything, then you can confess that this morning. And you can be baptized and immersed in water and be a child of God. It may also be a song of encouragement for you to resolve this morning that it may be that my family home life was not what it has been. And maybe I need to get my children or my spouse together and we need to talk and we need to be open and say, it hasn't been what it ought to be, but that changes today. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no reason to apologize for that. You can make that determination today and start incorporating some of these godly habits into your home.